all of you, because if you watch this show, if you listen to this show, you know I spend a lot of time talking about the brutal beating death of Tyre Nichols. That was the 28-year-old young man in Tennessee who was stopped by Black police officers for some kind of alleged traffic violation. There was some kind of altercation at the first stop, and then he moves on to a second stop where he's pulled out of his vehicle and literally beaten to death on camera. He's just minutes away from his mother's house. He's trying to crawl his way to his mother's house. There's the most horrific video you can imagine of officers kicking and beating and stomping and standing around this dying man, just being so casual about the fact that they beat him. We also see in some of the video, the officers trying to get their story straight, trying to compose what the narrative will be. The lie will be as they try to explain what happened to Tyre Nichols. Ended in just what should have happened, the indictment of 5 officers, former officers now, who 2 of which have decided that they are going to come clean. They're going to admit to what they did, and they've actually pled guilty. One of those former officers is facing a prison sentence of 40 years. One is facing recommended prison time of 15 years. And these are just the federal constitutional violation trials to determine if the constitutional rights of Tyre Nichols were violated, if excessive force under federal statutes were used against, if excessive force was used against Tyre Nichols. This is not the state case because they've also been charged with second-degree murder by the local district attorney in the state. But one of the most brutal beatings and killings of an African-American, unarmed African-American man by police that we've seen. And so the trial is taking place. Now, many of you may not know that because unlike the trial of Derek Chauvin, the police officer that kneeled on the neck of George Floyd and literally killed him before our very eyes, this trial has gotten very little media attention. Now, it is a federal trial, so there aren't cameras inside federal cases, but typically, even when there's a federal trial happening of this nature, high-profile nature, you'll see reports from reporters coming outside of the courtroom reporting on it. You'll see big, splashy articles on the front page of national media outlets, but none of that with this Tyre Nichols case. You have to dig to find the stories about what's happening day to day in this trial. Well, this is a case I'm very interested in as a civil rights lawyer, as a mother, as a community leader. I mean, it just strikes a chord with me that a young man who was a father at the time would lose his life at the hands of police officers for the most insane, ridiculous reasons ever. And we're going to talk about what some of those reasons are that have been disclosed during this trial. But also want to talk about how come the media has been so absent, so uninterested in this case. So Sharon Reed, Emmy Award-winning journalist, TV host for In the Black Network, has agreed to stick around and for the first part of hour to help us make sense of what's happening from a media standpoint with respect to this case. I don't know what to say when I think about this case. It is so horrifying. This 29-year-old man was beat to death by the very people that have the responsibility of protecting his life. But you haven't heard much about this case. This isn't a case that has gotten the kind of media attention that we saw when Derek Chauvin was on trial. And as I said in the intro, there is no cameras in federal court houses, and this is a federal court trial. But what do you make of how little has, been reported out about this trial?
I can only draw on my own experience in the newsroom and those editorial meetings, Areva, where we sit around and say what we felt the right stories for the broadcast, which would be coming up, would be. Black on black crime was not among the things. Usually in local news, it would be coded as, well, we think that's suspected drugs. And people don't care about that. And there was an emphasis on whiter counties surrounding where I am here, most recently Metro Atlanta. So I think that it was something that gained national prominence because it was so disgusting and there was so much footage and so many lies. And then it went away because once we saw the mugshots and it was Black officers who made the mistake of believing that they were just blue like their comrades. Now they're stripped of that, fired and charged. And as you said, 2 reach plea deals. They're Black and the victim is Black. And, you know, I know you're probably going to talk about it, but also the reasoning is just pathetic. The alleged reasons as to why this deadly encounter began. But I think it's because it's Black on Black crime. And that's not sexy, of course, to the mainstream media.
Yeah, this trial has been going on for 3 weeks. I mean, 3 weeks. And you have to search through the news reports, through the various newspapers, through the various news outlets to find this trial. And you're right, these officers were Black. Derek Chauvin, who we watched almost religiously every day on trial, was a white officer, and most of the other officers involved in the murder of George Floyd were white, not Black. I think there was an Asian officer or someone else of color, but not African American. I don't know, Sharon. It's hard to understand that because I think we get that when we've been forced to get it, right? When it's a shooting in a Black neighborhood, right? The various shootings that happen in urban neighborhoods, we know there's going to be very little reporting about those. We don't talk about that kind of violence in the same way, say, if there's a school shooting. So we've been forced to accept that in the way the media reports out. But somehow I thought we had gotten past that. I thought there was this moment where police brutality and the fact, remember, we used to be in the days where you couldn't even get a police officer indicted. Police officers would get away with this kind of excessive force. And, you know, the blue code of silence would prevent officers from coming forward, from testifying. Prosecutors didn't want to prosecute officers. It was bad for their careers. So we went through this period where, you know, there's a seismic shift of no longer were police officers given this kind of, you know, de facto immunity, and they were starting to be held accountable. So what about that? I mean, are we still in a moment where that matters, that we are now actually holding police officers accountable?
No, not unless, by and large, I'm not going to say it has never happened, but let's not forget what went down with Officer Chauvin and his cohorts, okay? Remember who had to step in and make sure there were appropriate charges because they really wanted them to get off. They wanted them to get off. And that's how their buddies, the buddy prosecutor, initially charged them, okay? Mr. Ellis said, AG, that's not going to happen here. But in this case, these are 5 Black men accused of killing another Black man. And I think the way you phrased it there, even to say, you know, usually this code blue, that to me proves the point. If these were white people, there would be some kind of stake that perhaps even the media would have in watching how this plays out, making sure they get a fair trial, even if that's not what they lead with on the news. But here it's not. These are throwaway people, and this is kind of a throwaway their problem. That's why I phrased it as these Black officers found out that the same rules don't apply to them, this shield, this coddling, and these reduced charges.
I guess I get that, Sharon, when we have white victims, right? We know there is this white, you know, woman syndrome that happens in the media. So for white missing women, right? If they go missing, there's all this obsession with covering their stories. What is it about our society that wants to see the trial of a white officer that kills a Black person, but not the Black officer? I'm still grappling with that. Like, that's sick.
I just don't think they have a stake in it. Listen, the state of politics, which I even hate calling it politics, because this is this disgusting place that we find ourselves in, polar opposites on, I don't even want to say opposite sides, because some of us are on the side of what is integrity filled and I think moral. And others of us are saying we don't care about certain people and we're going to accuse them of everything from stealing and eating our pets to murder and rape across the border. That's the state that we're in. So when you have a large segment of the population, and many and most are in the media who make these decisions, who aren't that vested in either the victim or the perp, it's not sexy to them. I honestly believe that is part of it. They're not looking through the same lens as you and I are. Law enforcement, outrageous, beating a man to death. Where we haven't even heard more, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, where's that police chief who made her mark doing the same kinds of things, or at least attached to them, here in Atlanta? Who stood before the cameras, Areva, and pretended that she was as shocked as we are, which is ludicrous. She was behind this team, and the media coddled her. I like to say they gave her a cuddle, because what's the big deal? Why ask the relevant questions here? She still hasn't, in my view, perhaps I'm wrong, been held to account.
Let me ask you this, Sharon, you're in Atlanta. Another crime story I was reading this morning in my daily perusal of the news was this Young Dolph trial, this rapper. And these one of the witnesses today who took a plea deal said that he was involved in the shooting death of this rapper. Is that case, again, black on black, black shooter, black rapper, is that case getting a lot of play in the Atlanta area? I know this Tyre Nichols case, this is a federal trial happening in Memphis, Tennessee. It's the South, but it's not Atlanta. But this rapper, this trial, this murder trial of this young rapper is playing out in a courtroom in Atlanta. What kind of news media is that getting?
Not much. And I would tell you, listen, Atlanta has a black mayor, and it has, and there's been vows that it will remain that way for decades. Okay. But at the end of the day, media and different interests still rule. And there's many black anchors. It's one of those rare cities. That doesn't mean the people who are making the decisions look like us. And I don't know that you should have to necessarily look like us. It should be balanced. It's not. But no, it's not getting a lot of coverage because this is thug life and nobody cares, And we've seen it happen time and time again, Areva. And I understand what you're saying about, there's a black victim and an accused who is also black. But I liken it to the same thing we saw about crack versus cocaine, or now with meth and all kinds of opioids, suddenly everyone is drawn to this and sympathetic and hiring mental health experts to explain why we had this phenomenon. That is not the case when you are dealing with stereotypically throwaway people, a rapper killed and this guy accused. It's just not where the media is. They're looking at Cobb County and Gwinnett County and other parts of Fulton. They're looking at rural parts of Georgia. They don't want to see this thug life. Instead of just covering what is an epidemic, a crime epidemic.
And I want to make a correction. I thought that trial of Young Dolph was happening in Atlanta. It's actually happening in a state court in Memphis as well. So both of these cases are kind of
simultaneous. We got the RICO case here.
Yes, you have the RICO case. So this is the murder case of Young Dolph. I hear what you're saying about rappers. So I'll go back to Atlanta, even though this trial isn't taking place there. But rappers have a big presence in a city like Atlanta. Yes, Young Thug is in Atlanta and Dolph is in Memphis. I got to get my hip hop geography right. Thank you, Robert. But given the presence of, hip hop and rap music in Atlanta, what about that Young Thug trial? Is that is in Atlanta? That does involve, an Atlanta district attorney. Is that getting a lot of news attention?
It did at one point. And remember, Fonnie Willis, the embattled DA here, who's done some groundbreaking things, loves RICO. And so she charges them, and you have some in the music industry coming out and saying, how dare you? Remember, she was using actual lyrics from their music to convict them and say, there's a confession. And like I said, you had Kevin Liles and other music industry vets saying, this isn't right. But again, these are rap lyrics. Then came along the RICO charges against another criminal, another convicted felon, Donald Trump. And so that consumed the airwaves. And I can't quibble with that so much. This trial with Gunna and Young Thug, Gunna made a deal, has been going on for so long The judge was replaced for having ex parte communications, which you would be able to explain better than I am. So there's lots of juicy stuff going on here, and yet it's not really a thing. It's not a thing here.
And again, we're talking on black crime. These are black defendants on trial for killing black rap artists. I just maybe thought because they're celebrities. So, in Los Angeles, a story that might not otherwise get coverage if there is a celebrity angle to it, even though it might be a person of color or a black person, it's likely to get more media attention because of the celebrity angle. So I was just wondering, in Atlanta, these rappers are considered, I would presume you guys consider them celebrities, right?
Sure. But
Okay.
Nipsey Hussle out there covered greatly?
Yes, extensively. And so much so that people that didn't know him or know his music got acquainted with him. He became a martyr in many ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the media, basically made him into a saint. There were people who, had some reservations about that, but there was a lot of focus on his community involvement, the work he did around the community, the work he did to promote entrepreneurship and business ownership in the Crenshaw district in Los Angeles. Not so much focus on his gang ties, his gang affiliations, but his murder was heavily, heavily covered. And like I said, folks who had never heard of Nipsey Hussle learned about him. So I was just wondering if Atlanta had the same celebrity culture, because we know celebrity news takes on a different level of importance depending on the city. A good friend of mine from New York, I remember years ago, she was visiting. She said she was never so disgusted by the local news in LA because she never wanted to know as much as she learned about celebrities by watching she said, Areva, she said, I was just fed up by the time, the news was over. It was like celebrity news story after celebrity news story. So I'm a little surprised that Atlanta doesn't cover its black celebrities, i.e. these rappers.
It does, but Areva, this is, LA's a special place, a special bubble. I'm not saying it's free of the things that we experience. This is the South still. And people like to think of Atlanta as this black Mecca, this magical place. But even within the construct of what is Atlanta proper, there is a coexistence, a contract, if you will, between Buckhead and white business and Atlanta and the political machine here that is only able to coexist if we allow for certain things. But the rest, minutes out of Atlanta proper, you got to remember, this is still the South. Ahmaud Arbery's family knows that. They know that. And so I'm not suggesting that these kinds of heinous things can't happen, crimes, racism, in California, in Los Angeles. Of course they do. But Atlanta has a history and it's still here. It is still here. You can feel it. You can see it. You can touch it. Remember what went down here in the phone call. And I have friends, I'll call them, who still caution me. There was nothing wrong with the call, Sharon.
Yeah.
Okay.
11,000 votes. Nothing wrong.
Right. Nothing wrong with it.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for doing double duty
Appreciate
with me today and helping me understand and helping my audience understand better what's happening around the coverage of the Tyre Nichols and other cases involving African-American defendants and victims.